Welcome back to Three Men and a Mystery. I'm John Lord.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
Here we are back with episode 5 of season 3, Tattooed Tears, the story of Allyson Watterson. On today's episode, we're continuing with the story. Ben has been arrested, but it's not related to Allyson's disappearance. What charges got him arrested? What's in his criminal history? And where is he now? We're going to go through all that and more with today's guest, criminal behaviorist, former law enforcement officer, and Three Men favorite, Sarah Cailean. Welcome back to the show, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. Whenever we get into information like this, we want to have someone that can help us understand these police records and these charges, and we're really thankful to have you here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to do it. It's fascinating to me to go through these when you've got every one of these cases is so different, and so when you send me some of these rap sheets, it's interesting to go through it and kind of just try and piece together at least what detectives might be looking at the paths that I could speculate they might be taking.
Yeah, and we definitely don't take the easy ones for this show.
No.
And would you mind, Sarah, just reminding listeners where they can find your work at?
Sure. Traditionally, I would say that you can find me pretty regularly on HLN. I'm a regular contributor to True Crime Live and a couple of other shows on HLN, or like they'll bring me on for breaking cases. COVID has put a lot of everything on hold, obviously. I think you can still find me on HLN through like on demand with the series, the limited series that I hosted and executive produced last year, Hell in the Heartland, which was the story of the disappearance of Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman in Oklahoma in 1999. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with that case. And in fact, it's my understanding that Hell in the Heartland has just been released in the UK and in Ireland. So folks across the pond can check that out there. And honestly, right now, I've been dug in pretty deep to a current cold case that I'm investigating with an agency in Alabama. So I've been, in addition to the COVID stuff, I've been kind of keeping a more low profile just because I've been working on that full time.
Is that going to become a project of some kind also? Is that a documentary or a series or?
Yes. So we were in discussions with a couple of different networks to produce a series about the investigation itself and about the case. Again, right as COVID hit. So a lot of those discussions got put on hold, but I am committed to continuing to investigate the case. I didn't feel that the family should have to, they've already waited almost 27 years for an answer. And so I talked with my producing partners. The producing partners on this is Arc Media, who is an Emmy award-winning, Peabody award-winning, Oscar-nominated documentary film company, and they agreed that the most important thing to do was to continue to work on the case. So when I picked back up on it in May, when it became clear that we were not going to be able to hold for production at that point, I started audio recording everything just so that I would have a record of it I could go back to. And we all decided to start talking about it as a podcast series.
Absolutely.
So we're now in discussions with a network. I'm hoping the final stage of discussions to release the series as a podcast first.
How great to have partners like that are really going for the greater good in it. I mean, that's amazing. How often do you hear about that?
It's pretty rare, and I feel so incredibly lucky to be a part of this team. Even just kind of in this ancillary way, the work they've done is important and game changing. I mean, this was the same company that made Who Killed Malcolm X last year on Netflix. They were just nominated for an Emmy for that. They have true integrity, which can sometimes be hard to find. I think when you try to start blending criminal investigations with the media. There are some other great partners. I found HLN to be a great partner. I really would never say anything bad about my experiences there.
Oh yeah.
But this is definitely next level. And when I said to them, I really can't continue to hold for production at this point, they were 100% behind it and said that, this victim's story needs to be resolved, whether it's told to the public or not.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to the case we're reviewing here today, Allyson Watterson's case. I just wanted to kind of put a question to everyone and kick around a little conversation. Your son comes home one morning saying his girlfriend is missing. You supposedly go out looking for her for almost the whole day and then eventually decide to call the authorities. Is the 30-hour gap between when Ben last sees Allyson and when they call it in, is that believable or reasonable from your point of view? Let's start with Gray. What do you think about that 30-hour gap?
Yeah, I don't think that it's reasonable, the 30-hour gap. It seems like if you have a missing girlfriend, that Ben would have immediately started getting people over and trying to help. But it seems like he wanted to spend some time to cover up, or, it feels like he's trying to cover up or figure out what to do to get out of the situation he's in now. Because I think he might have even been aware of her ultimate, the ultimate situation.
It's interesting you say that because I know on the outset, that's kind of what I'm thinking too. You've got 30 hours. He's running around out there with his father. We've got an interview coming up later in this season with a private investigator, and he's going to give us some better information about were they really out there looking or was there something else? As a matter of fact, we're going to have a couple of clips with that private investigator in this episode as well. Morph, what do you think about the 30-hour gap?
Yeah, I think Gray hit the nail right on the head. It's doesn't seem reasonable. It seems kind of fishy. And to any of us that have kids, you could see a parent doing something to help their kid out of a bad situation. I've never been in that situation, but I'd like to think that I wouldn't help something be covered up. But we all know if you have kids, there's limits that you go through, that you break to help them. And it seems like some of that may be going on. But again, that's just based on that. It looks fishy, and that's going to raise those kind of questions.
How about it, Sarah?
Well, I completely agree. It is certainly the very first thing that as an investigator, I would kind of put onto my little checklist and say, what happened in these 30 hours and what is the reason for not reporting? In particular, at least from some of the stuff I've looked into, that there was some conversation between Ben's mom and Allyson's mom, and that she didn't lie, but she certainly omitted the truth that she didn't know, that there was something to be concerned about. The first thing I go to, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get going when we kind of examine his record. The very first thing that comes to mind is that they were using that time to get him to come down off of whatever he might have been on. He may have been high at the time, and they needed for him not to be high by the time they reached out to authorities.
Interesting.
That's the very first thing I think of. Wow. And then, yes, trying to either get an idea from him of what happened. He may not have been being forthright with his parents either.
Right.
We know that his story has sort of changed throughout. It's not a wildly different story each time. It's not we were with a bunch of people or she got into a stranger's car. It's all kind of variations on a theme. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they kind of needed to hammer that out a little bit. I agree with Morph that it's difficult not to presume that the parents were at least, complicit in wasting those hours.
That's why
kind of the most generous way I can put that.
Yeah, no, I gotcha. And that's exactly why we need to bring in other analysis on stuff like this, because I wouldn't have even picked up on that, thinking about a cool down period, basically, for him to sober up a little bit if they're going to be interacting with police. And we already know he didn't want to interact with police when they showed up at the fire station. Right.
Really. And he certainly, given that he had a warrant, that he was, and I think in addition to the warrant, he was also on probation for something else. Yeah. So they really needed him not to be high when they started talking to the police. They also may not have been getting a straight story out of him. If meth is his drug of choice, which it seems to be, they may not have. They may have been trying to figure out what the hell happened. They may have suspected, foul play or something, and they needed to kind of try and get their arms around what they were dealing with before they moved forward. again, like Morph, I guess I understand it, but I certainly don't condone it. And I have 16-year-old sons, and I love them, and I would lay down in traffic for them. But if another human being's life was on the line, I certainly don't imagine that I would shield them from giving all the help they could give, to pursue that.
It just seemed like there was so much. It seemed like there was so much time when so many different times where the mother didn't come forward with crucial information.
Yeah, I also think she's. Well, we'll talk about it as we go through.
Okay.
I think there's a lot more there.
And Sarah brought up a good point too. The fact that when they had that interaction, the two moms, she failed to mention that, hey, what was it, that they were arrested, or the incident that happened earlier?
The robbery.
Yeah, how do you not mention that?
An alleged robbery. Right, yeah, exactly.
That excluding that just right away raises some red flags in my book.
Yeah.
Well, that delay was also concerning to Detective Mark Pavelny. KOIN quoted him as saying, "That delay is concerning to us, and we're trying to put together what happened in that intervening time." So Don, Ben's father, called deputies at around 5:30 p.m. Police responded, and according to Oregon Live, found a truck near the property. Several witnesses said Ben moved it out of sight as officers arrived. Ben admitted to them that the truck was stolen. Ben was charged with 4 counts of probation violation and 5 counts of failure to appear, along with new counts of possession of a stolen vehicle, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, theft, and fraudulent use of a credit card. He initially pled not guilty to the new charges, but would soon be facing even more. In the mugshot, Ben appears to be smiling. He has scratches on his nose, forehead, and possibly under one eye. And I don't know, Sarah, did you see the mugshot? Have you seen it?
I did.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Did it look to you like that could possibly be defensive wounds? There's mention that he slept in the blackberry bushes. Do you think that's reasonable?
Right. If he was high on meth, anything is possible. Anything is possible. And that's sort of been one of the things that I keep circling around on this. And again, when we talk about his record, it's difficult not to look at him at a minimum as a person of interest in foul play. But then there's the simple possibility that he was, high as a kite, and they were out in the woods. They were clearly trekking around in the woods for some time. We know that to be true, even with the sightings of her, still being with him. So it's also completely plausible. He has plausible deniability of those being any sort of defensive wounds. They didn't look as severe to me. I mean, when I think of defensive wounds on the face, mm-hmm. it would typically be an up close, like a strangling type of assault, because, as you're fighting it like this. And right. It didn't look to me like a lot of those that I have seen. It looks worse.
That's a good point. The lines were very fine. It didn't look like right. a fingernail where a bunch of flesh would be torn or bunched. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. a really good point.
We'll continue learning about Ben's past criminal history right after this short break.
Hello, everyone. Let me tell you about the Apple for the Teacher podcast. I'm Anna Thomas, a teacher and your host. So you're probably thinking it's about reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? Well, think again. It's a fresh take on true crime, where you wouldn't expect to find true crime. In schools, yes, schools. I will share with you the tragic and shocking stories I have uncovered in my own profession. You will hear stories about murder, abduction, school bus hijack, student disappearance, suicide, kidnap and ransom, school camp tragedy, the list goes on. So if you're looking for something a little different in the true crime genre, then Apple for the Teacher is for you. So join me as I present the bad apples. But until then, remember to be a good apple.
Welcome back, and please keep in mind that our sponsors are helping us raise funds that will go towards investigating this case further, so please show them the same support they're showing us. So what did we find about his past criminal charges? Well, quite a bit. We found records of a court date on June 5th, 2017, where the following charges were being handled. These records noted a misdemeanor Class A for menacing. That was dismissed. There was a felony Class C, unlawful use of a weapon. He's convicted on that one, and there's sentencing guidelines here. They're also giving it a crime severity. Are you aware of that terminology?
So, yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of it specifically in that term. The state law that I operated under most as a detective and as a patrol officer was the state of Ohio. And every state will have its own kind of terminology for stuff like that. But it's very obvious to me that what that is what we in Ohio and what a lot of other states refer to as level of enhancement, right? Okay. So if you have, say, for example, domestic violence is an easy one to demonstrate this in. So if you have domestic violence and it's what's considered like a low level assault, like a misdemeanor 1, but there are certain circumstances that can enhance it to the next level. And that's what, you know what I mean? Like if there was a child present, stuff like that, it enhances it a level. And that's what that sounds like, is that what I read between the lines on that particular case, that's the one that where supposedly it started out as an attempted kidnapping, correct? That's that same case. I believe
it might be. We're going to hear a little bit more. Yeah. Okay.
So, and the reason I think that is that the initial charge on the attempted kidnapping and possession of a weapon, the weapon also had the serial number filed off. He probably purchased it like that. And the case that I had looked up, he was essentially trying to get a friend. I assume he was either going to rob the guy or take him to, make him give him some drugs or something he could sell or something. Mm-hmm. So he had a gun on him. He had the guy in the car. And that is technically kidnapping. Once you either take somebody out of their environment and put them in a different environment against their will, or if you prevent them from leaving an environment, right? So you can kidnap somebody in your own home. If you bar the door and you won't let them leave, that's kidnapping.
Right.
And so in this case, that he, the kid talked him into, not kid, the young man talked Ben into letting him go into the house to get his phone. He goes in, he tells his dad what's going on. Dad calls the police and they show up and arrest Ben. He's clearly not a criminal mastermind. Okay. And when they arrested him on the attempted kidnapping and the weapons and stuff like that, what happens next in court is what we see on those papers. Right. And what we see on the papers is that essentially they were pled down, but then they were given that like enhancement, like, yes, this was menacing, but it was really serious, right, as opposed to just, say verbal threats or threats online, something like that would also get a menacing charge.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense, or did I
Absolutely.
Just get way too into the weeds?
No, absolutely. And there is some sentencing information here. Are you able to kind of decipher this for us? What happened here in terms? I see that it says there's supervised probation. We've got a start date for that. It's a duration of 5 years. Is there anything else in this block of text here that stands out to you?
It's funny. I moved over to my notes, so I don't have it in front of me, but I was just looking at it like half an hour ago. Yeah. It looks to me like they recognized that this was between people who knew each other. This, you know what I mean? This was sort of a matter of they're going to treat this according to the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. And so they allowed him to be pled down to these lesser charges with less severe punishment. And I would assume the court was trying to be generous and saying, if you show up for all of this stuff, clearly you've got, some drug problems and get some treatment and stuff like that we can let this go away. I would venture to say that the guy he attempted to kidnap was probably also involved in some of the same shady stuff that he was at the time. Sure. And they took that into account as well, that the victim was probably somewhat complicit in his own, a little victim blaming by the court, basically.
Yeah. Well, and in this, we can see that some of the conditions are that he gets enrolled in a program, that he cannot use or possess narcotics, can't control or can't consume or possess controlled substances or prescribe medications without the prior knowledge of your medical professional, can't drive without a valid driver's license and proper insurance, and may have to submit to random body substance testing at the request of his supervising officer. Also, polygraph examination happens around that. So it really seems like they might be being fair in terms of giving him a chance, but they're
absolutely. They took it serious. They took it very seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems, at least from outward appearances, like whoever his defense attorney was did a very good job in getting him, fair treatment. But also that the prosecutors took it seriously, as did the judge.
Yeah.
So.
Don't you think it's kind of interesting that they mentioned the hey, make sure you have a valid driver's license and proper insurance? I mean, yeah, of course.
So there's a little bit of stacking with that, right? So when you arrest somebody, especially for something really serious, and this can start to sound bad. It can start to sound like, oh, you're just kind of trying to ruin people's lives. And that's not the case. When you arrest someone for something serious, there is often the fear or the belief, rightfully so, that a lot of the stuff is going to get tossed out and that there will be no real repercussions for something that was essentially serious. And so you will kind of charge everything available to you at that time. And when the police showed up, when this guy's dad called the police and they rolled up and he was in a car, they also would have looked at his ID. He probably didn't have a valid driver's license. The car was not, registered correctly or didn't have the right insurance. And so then they throw all of that on there too. You're going to put everything you can on there. And then the judge is going to view that vehicle licensing stuff and driver's licensing stuff is something a court typically uses to allow the defendant to demonstrate that they are kind of getting in line with society. You know what I mean? Like that you're really getting your life together if you've paid all your fines and you've got a license reinstated and you've got valid insurance. It means you're playing by the rules. And so, the police would definitely put that on there. And then the judge would make that, a condition of saying, okay, you're allowed to play nicely with others again because you're following the rules.
Yeah. And to your point about the stacking of the charges, we're going to see as we're going through this list, there's a bunch of these charges that they get dismissed or they get dropped. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, even continuing with this court appearance, there's a misdemeanor Class A for unlawful possession of a firearm. That gets dismissed. However, there's a felony unclassified for the alteration, removal, or obliteration of the firearm ID number. And there's a conviction on that. And the crime severity on that's actually a 9. So that's higher than the previous one that we had talked about. Attempt to commit a Class A felony, removed from the charging instrument, but attempt to commit a Class B felony, that gets dismissed. However, there's another for attempt to commit a Class C, and there's a conviction on that. Can you explain that to us? What's going on with?
Well, yeah, the attempted kidnapping would be the attempt at the Class A felony. I don't know what. I guess if they had stacked them, then the attempted B would probably have something to do with the firearm. It was probably difficult to prove, unless he had it in his waistband, it would be difficult to prove the possession of the firearm. Sometimes they can say, oh, this is my friend's car or whatever. I mean, I'm just totally speculating wildly because we don't have the arrest report. And I did try and get it. Oregon wouldn't let me get into that. I like different states have different things that you can see in their sunshine laws. And I tried to dig apart the case. And I was like, anybody can look at this. I want the good stuff. Because I was trying to get the actual arrest report and see what was said. Yeah. But the Class C means that's what the defense attorney got them to plead these big things down to. But they allowed for the enhancement with the filing off of the serial number on the gun. I mean, there is no innocent reason that anybody removes the serial number from a weapon.
Seriously. Yeah.
Right. And whether he did that or not, like I said, he probably bought it from somebody for, $100 or, traded some meth for it or something. So he probably wasn't the one to saw it off. Again, I don't find him to be quite that forward thinking in terms of his criminal activity. Yeah. But, it's just how the case was pled down.
And that's a pretty big charge. That's a federal offense doing that too, I think. Yeah, I believe so.
They also had a misdemeanor Class A assault in the 4th degree and a conviction on that.
Yeah, that's going to be the easiest one to get. And in all honesty, a class 1 felony or a class class 1 misdemeanor, or in Ohio, what we would call like an M1, sometimes those will have the most teeth, because you can still get a 6-month sentence on a first-degree misdemeanor. And, you can really alter the expectations in somebody's life with a first-degree misdemeanor. But there tends to be a lot less pushback if you've gotten that down from a felony, right? So the prosecutors will go, okay, well, we'll give you this, but then we're going to expect you to get the full brunt of that.
We had the privilege of interviewing the private investigator that worked on Allyson's case. Michael O'Connell gave us some more insight into these charges and the impact they had, as well as another occurrence he recalls from Ben's criminal history.
He had been arrested for an attempted kidnap. It was a bizarre case. He goes to the home of an acquaintance who he had some kind of dispute with over drugs, I think. And this is a young man. I think he was juvenile. And he says, "You have to come with me." And he threatens him. He has a gun. I don't know if he had the gun on him, but a gun was found by the police, ultimately either on him or in the vehicle he was driving at the time. The serial number had been obliterated, which is against the law. But either because of Ben's lack of sophistication or drug use, he allows this young man. The young man says something to the effect of, "Okay, I'll go with you, but I have to get my wallet, or let me get my phone." So he allows him to go back into the house. And the young man goes into the house and tells his dad that Ben is outside with a gun and he's threatening him. And so the dad naturally calls the police and they come and arrest him. It was that series of events, that attempted kidnap, the weapons violations, etc., that was hanging over Ben's head. In other words, the case had been resolved, but it was a suspended sentence to the effect of, okay, you'll get this lighter sentence if you can stay out of trouble for the next year. And ultimately, he violated that agreement. And that's the warrant that was hanging over his head. And that's why he's in one of the Oregon state prisons right now. And then I don't know the details, but he had some kind of altercation with one of his sisters. I understand that he had threatened her. And then I think he had several other arrests, but I don't know the details of them.
So, seems like the PI picked up the same information you did in terms of that previous charge. Do you have any other thoughts based on what he was saying there?
No, I didn't realize that the victim in the case was a juvenile, which certainly that might have been why the enhancements were so high. It's very interesting. There was another charge that I tried to dig into and couldn't find a lot of details on, which was that harassment charge. There's one on his thing that just says harassment. Yeah. And based on what the PI guy, the investigator is saying, again, totally just guessing, but I would bet that was whatever happened with the sister. And it probably was, it was probably just dropped, if there wasn't a physical altercation or whatever, and the family opted to drop it, then the police and prosecutors probably would have agreed to that.
We are going to continue with Sarah Cailean analyzing Ben's criminal history on the episode next week. We hope you will join us. Remember, you can find all the information and links you need for any specific episode together all in one place at www.3meninamystery.com. That's with the number 3. If you have any tips to call in on Allyson's case, please contact the Washington County Sheriff's Investigation Department at 593-846-2500. If you need to remain anonymous, please call Crime Stoppers of Oregon at 503-823-HELP. That's 503-823-4357.
If you have any feedback, corrections, or new details, you can send them to us via email at 3men@3menandamystery.com. That's with the number 3. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter. Our handle is at 3menandamystery. Or find us on Facebook.
3 Men and a Mystery is produced by John Lorden, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
Please be sure to rate us on the podcasting platform that you found us on, and help us grow by telling your friends and family about us.
What else are we going to find out about Ben's past? Believe it or not, we are just getting started, plus a huge discovery that just throws this case in a whole different direction. Please join us again next week. I'm John Lorden.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are 3 Men and a Mystery.